what happens when the truth of the past becomes just too uncomfortable for a whole society to really face?
Yeah, and how do new regimes sometimes use that discomfort? How do they actually rewrite history itself?
That's exactly the core question we're diving into today.
We are. We're exploring Peter Debic's really compelling dystopian novel, The Atlas Agenda. But our mission today, it kind of goes beyond just the story itself.
Right.
We're unpacking an expert opinion piece by Hans Schön. It's titled The Atlas Agenda as a Mirror of Authoritarian Remembrance Politics in MAGA USA and AfD Germany.
Okay.
And it offers this, well, fascinating and sometimes frankly unsettling look at how what seems like a straightforward science fiction novel can actually hold up a profound mirror to contemporary political movements and, the dangerous manipulation of history that we're seeing right now.
And it's definitely worth saying up front, before we get deep into the politics, the Atlas Agenda itself is just a fantastic read, like purely on its own terms.
Absolutely.
If you're just looking for a gripping story, it's a really compelling espionage thriller. It's set in this richly built sci-fi world. Great entertainment value.
Totally agree. But as Hans Schön makes really clear in his piece, its thematic resonance, well, it goes way beyond just entertainment.
So what's the core argument there?
Precisely. Schön's piece argues that, really at its heart, the Atlas Agenda portrays a society where history isn't just passively forgotten, it's actively, systematically manipulated to serve authoritarian goals.
Wow.
It's not just, background scenery. It provides this critical lens for understanding the rise of the MAGA movement in the U.S. and Germany's alternative for Deutschland, the AfD party.
So the novel acts as a kind of distorting mirror.
That's the phrase Schön uses, yeah. A distorting mirror reflecting these real-world dynamics.
That's a powerful image. Okay, so let's start with the U.S. side of that equation then, the MAGA movement. Schön's piece points to a very specific way history is handled there, selective interpretation.
Exactly. It manifests as this characteristic downplaying or sometimes just outright ignoring of past atrocities. Particularly, Schön notes those against indigenous peoples.
How so? Any examples?
Well, he cites Donald Trump's consistent emphasis on celebrating Columbus Day. Now, what's striking there, as the source points out, isn't just that Columbus, never actually set foot in the present-day U.S.
Right, which is already something.
Right, but more critically, that he was the one who initiated the transatlantic slave trade. So this focus on a kind of sanitized version of history, glossing over the really inconvenient truths, that's central to the MAGA narrative, according to Schön.
And it's chilling how Debic's novel kind of echoes this. It shows a society where these painful histories, they aren't just erased, they're actually repurposed.
Repurpose? How?
Well, the book says something like, slavery remained not to be mourned, but to be used. Truth became a lie became the truth. So it's not just about forgetting. It's about re-engineering national shame, turning it into a justification for what's happening now, for contemporary policies. The insight seems to be that inconvenient truths aren't just ignored, they're actually weaponized.
Weaponized to legitimize ongoing marginalization. Yeah, that's a crucial distinction Schön makes.
Okay.
And if we connect this to the wider picture, think about the aggressive immigration policies we saw under the Trump administration.
Right.
Schön's piece highlights two particularly stark cases that really exemplify how individual rights can get eroded in service of an ideology.
Which ones?
First, there was the wrongful deportation of a 2-year-old U.S. citizen, identified just as VML, along with her non-citizen mother and sibling. They were sent to Honduras.
A U.S. citizen deported.
Yes. And U.S. District Judge Terry Doughty raised really significant concerns about it, questioning the government's claims of consent and pointing out potential due process violations. Big red flags.
Wow. And the second case?
Then there's the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He was a Maryland resident, married to a U.S. citizen. He was mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Mistakenly.
Yes, despite a court ruling that explicitly prohibited it because of the severe threats he faced there from gangs. And even after they acknowledged it was an administrative error, the administration actively resisted efforts to bring him back.
That goes beyond just a mistake.
Well, exactly. Schön argues these incidents aren't just errors. They underscore systemic failures and raise serious concerns about fundamental individual rights.
And the novel ties into this?
Directly. Debic's narrative in the Atlas Agenda draws this parallel, showing a regime that scrutinizes and, quietly removes citizens based on ideological conformity, not just actual threats. The novel puts it like this. Borders no longer filtered threats, they filtered thoughts. Travelers were scrutinized like contraband, and citizens who believed the wrong things were quietly removed.
That connection really highlights the danger, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Prioritizing ideological purity over, well, basic democratic principles.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've seen this pattern with MAGA, according to Schön. How does this manipulation of history, how does that resonate across the Atlantic? Specifically with Germany's AfD. Schön argues they use a similar playbook, but the context is different, right?
Absolutely. A very unique historical context. The AfD gains traction, Schön suggests, by appealing to Germans who express a kind of weariness, a fatigue, with the nation's very extensive focus on Holocaust remembrance.
So they're saying enough.
In essence, yeah. They advocate for what they frame as a clean slate approach to national identity. Bjorn Höcke, who's a prominent AfD politician, he famously criticized the Berlin Holocaust Memorial, called it a monument of shame.
Monument of shame.
Yes. And he called for a 180-degree turn in Germany's remembrance culture. He even described the whole post-1945 approach as a stupid policy of coming to terms with the past.
Wow, that's blunt. And it goes even deeper than that, doesn't it? I think Schön mentions AfD members talking about a cult of guilt.
That's right. Schuldkult in German. Jens Meyer, an AfD judge, declared this cult of guilt to be finally over back in 2017.
Finally over.
And Wilhelm von Gottberg, another AfD board member, argued that basically processing the Nazi era was done, finished, and shouldn't define Germany's national identity anymore.
Which sounds very much like an explicit desire to just shed historical responsibility.
It does. And what's truly fascinating, and Schön points this out, is how the Atlas agenda just captures this exact sentiment.
How so?
Debig's characters, they talk about the deliberate erasure of historical memory. There are lines like, they built a country out of forgetting, they promised freedom from guilt, from the past, a total liberation of memory.
That's almost verbatim, isn't it?
It really is. It perfectly reflects that real-world tension in Germany. The clash between acknowledging this profound historical responsibility and, well, a desire just to move on.
A desire the AfD seems to know how to tap into.
Exactly. It's a dynamic the AfD has skillfully exploited, Schön argues, to gain political support. It offers a kind of psychological escape.
So, okay, what does this all mean then? For historical revisionism as a tool, an authoritarian tool, it seems like both the AMAG movement and the AfD are, in their own ways, leveraging it.
Leveraging it to foster nationalist feelings.
Yeah, and maybe ultimately to justify certain authoritarian policies. Schön's piece suggests that by reshaping history, these movements are trying to create a collective identity that feels, well, unburdened by past wrongs.
That's a really critical insight Schön offers. The enduring success of movements like MAGA and the AfD isn't just about clever messaging, right?
Oh.
It's rooted in something deeper and emotional logic, what Schön calls the comfort of the lie.
The comfort of the lie. Explain that.
Well, when political narratives offer really easy answers to complex problems, they kind of relieve individuals of the burden of thinking critically, dealing with guilt, or taking moral responsibility.
I see.
The source quotes the Atlas agenda again here. They didn't want truth. They wanted permission to stop remembering.
And psychologically, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Thinking about, like, cognitive dissonance theory.
Exactly. That theory tells us people tend to prefer information that aligns with what they already believe, even if it's, demonstrably false.
Because facing difficult truths takes effort.
Right. Accepting difficult historical truths like the genocide of indigenous peoples, or Germany's complicity in the Holocaust that requires real emotional labor, some serious self-reflection, denial. Well, denial offers immediate psychological relief. It's easier.
It's the path of least resistance emotionally.
You got it. And this phenomenon connects to that idea, famously attributed to Adolf Hitler. If you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed.
Right, the big lie concept.
Yeah. Now, the exact attribution, historians debate that, but the sentiment perfectly reflects the mechanism of Nazi propaganda and its chilling effectiveness even today.
And we've certainly seen this play out very vividly. I mean, Donald Trump's presidency and even post-presidency. That rhetoric exemplifies it.
Oh.
Well, according to the Washington Post's fact-checking database, he made over 30,000 false or misleading claims in just 4 years.
30,000.
Yeah. Many repeated constantly, even after being debunked. And probably the most impactful was the big lie about the 2020 election.
Right, the stolen election narrative.
Exactly. Where he just repeatedly asserted it was stolen, despite all the evidence, recounts, court cases saying otherwise. He famously claimed at one rally, They rigged the election and they're going to do it again.
And the Atlas agenda, Schön points out, echoes this through its fictional commission, this body that controls information.
How does the commission work?
Well, in the novel, truth became a lie. A lie became the truth. Historical atrocities like slavery are remembered, but selectively. Not as moments of shame to learn from, but as warnings against rebellion.
So they reinforce the need for authoritarian control.
Precisely. Trump's big lie functions similarly, Schön argues. It reframes an election defeat not as a legitimate loss, but as evidence of some deep state betrayal, thereby justifying attacks on democratic norms.
Which brings us neatly to another classic authoritarian tactic Schön discusses, manufacturing an internal enemy. Trump and his allies consistently push the false narrative that undocumented migrants are this major criminal threat, using really inflammatory language like they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
But the actual evidence, the empirical data, it directly contradicts this.
What does it show?
Well, a January 2025 House Judiciary Subcommittee report using data from Texas actually shows that undocumented immigrants are significantly less likely to be arrested for serious crimes compared to native-born citizens.
Less likely. How much less?
53% less likely for homicide arrests, 57% less for sexual offenses, and over 40% less for property crimes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of the narrative.
Completely. Yet, despite this data, the Trump administration continued using that rhetoric to justify policies like, child separation and mass deportations.
And Dybek's novel mirrors this too.
Perfectly, according to Schön, with the commission systematically targeting ideological dissenters, all framed as necessary for national security.
Right, that quote about borders filtering thoughts, not threats.
Exactly. The book states, borders no longer filtered threats, they filtered thoughts. Travelers were scrutinized like contraband, and citizens who believed the wrong things were quietly removed.
It's one of fascism's oldest tricks, isn't it? Create a perceived internal enemy to justify clamping down, consolidate control.
It transforms moral panic into a tool of governance. And crucially, it helps reduce that cognitive dissonance for supporters. It gives them someone to blame.
And the AfD does something similar with memory itself.
In a way, yes. Schön draws a parallel to how AfD rhetoric reframes Holocaust remembrance, not as a moral duty, but as a kind of memory tax.
A tax, like a burden.
Exactly, transforming profound moral responsibility into a perceived emotional burden they promise to lift. As Dybek's novel puts it, the commission did not invent forgetting. It weaponized the desire to let go.
So it's tapping into that exhaustion, that desire for simplicity.
Precisely. This narrative strategy appeals not through reason or evidence, but through, emotional exhaustion and a longing for clear, uncomplicated answers.
Ultimately, then, the comfort offered by these ideological lies gives authoritarian movements a really critical psychological edge.
It does. They present themselves not as oppressors, but almost as liberators.
Liberators from what?
Liberators from confusion, from shame, from the messiness and complexity of difficult truths.
That reframing turns fascism, or authoritarianism, into a kind of psychological refuge.
Especially powerful, Schön notes, in times of perceived cultural or economic decline. When citizens are encouraged to feel good rather than be good,
then democratic accountability and historical truth become pretty expendable.
Easily expendable. Which leads us to one of the most, I think, profound ethical questions that the Atlas agenda itself raises.
Which is?
In the novel, the central falsehood, the lie the society is built on, it's so vast and so deeply embedded that entire nations are basically reconstructed on its foundation. And they achieve stability, even a kind of progress, based entirely on this fabricated history. So the question Schön pulls from this is, under those conditions, is it still justifiable to reveal the truth? Or does exposing the foundational lie risk unleashing maybe greater chaos, greater harm, than just allowing societies to continue building meaning, even progress, upon that shared illusion?
That's a really tough question. No easy answers there.
Not at all.
So the Atlas agenda, reading it through Schön's lens, it really serves as this powerful cautionary tale, doesn't it? About our tendency, maybe society's deep-seated tendency, to prefer comfort over truth.
Yeah, it starkly highlights that dangerous psychological trade-off we make when we avoid the hard work, the often painful work, of confronting injustice and complexity.
And this dynamic isn't just fictional, is it? Schön argues it's playing out with disturbing clarity right now, in our own time.
Absolutely. In the United States, as Schön's piece points out, the MAGA movement seems emboldened, building its power on, well, a foundation of misinformation and grievance politics. It offers followers easy villains and these nostalgic myths instead of difficult realities.
And in Germany.
Similarly, in Germany, the rise of the AfD reflects, Schön argues, a growing rejection by some of the country's long-standing culture of remembrance, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, as many citizens seem to seek liberation from the historical responsibility tied to the Holocaust and World War II.
So this deep dive, looking at Dybek's novel through Hans Schön's opinion piece, it really diagnoses a critical challenge of our age.
It really does. And the conclusion seems pretty unmistakable.
Which is?
When you choose not to remember, when you trade the burden of truth for the sheer convenience of amnesia, you effectively pave the way for regimes that promise relief.
But ultimately deliver control.
Exactly.
So perhaps the final thought for you, the listener, is really to think critically about the historical truths you encounter, and maybe more importantly, the narratives you choose to accept.